How to feel God's presence. When everything feels empty, there are days when the heart feels like a desert. Nothing blooms, nothing moves, and God's silence sounds like absence. The soul wonders if he still listens, if he still cares, if he's still there. It's on those days, when faith feels heavy and exhaustion wins, that the true encounter is born. Because God doesn't reveal himself in euphoria, but in pauses. He doesn't show himself in noise, but in the intervals. And in that space between what was and what is yet to be, he teaches the secret of his presence. God doesn't disappear. He simply changes tone. You may not hear him, but he speaks. You may not feel him, but he acts. God's presence doesn't depend on your perception. It's constant. The problem is that pain often drowns out the sound of faith. The noise of anxiety silences hope. And when that happens, the heart gets lost in shadows, believing it's been forgotten. But emptiness isn't the end of presence. It's the soil where it begins to grow again. Emptiness is the ground of revelation. It's the moment when a person, tired of chasing feelings, surrenders to silence. It's when you stop trying to control God and finally begin to listen. The absence that hurts is the space where he draws near. Because God doesn't force his way in, he waits for room. And sometimes he uses emptiness itself to carve out space within us. The problem is that we've been taught to seek the divine only through emotion. We want to feel something extraordinary, as if faith were a physical experience. But God is not a shiver. God is permanence. He is the one who remains when everything else fades, the one who speaks without sound and touches without hands. When everything feels cold, it's because he's teaching you a new way to sense warmth. When everything feels meaningless, it's because he's changing the meaning of your path. There's a kind of spiritual maturity that only grows in silence. It's faith that continues without emotion, love that persists without response, trust that renews itself even when the heavens seem closed. This faith is the most precious of all because it doesn't rest on signs, but on conviction. It doesn't need to feel in order to know. And that's the kind of faith emptiness builds. God doesn't abandon you when you can't feel him. He's inviting you to grow. He pulls you toward a place where his presence is no longer dependent on stimuli, but on relationship. It's the moment when he wants you to stop asking for signs and start being one. When your life becomes a silent testimony, heaven itself manifests within you. Imagine a field after a storm. Everything seems destroyed, yet beneath the soil are seeds that only germinate when the surface breaks. The same happens with the heart. When certainties shatter, the roots of faith find room to grow. Emptiness, in truth, is God's gentlest way of saying, "Let me grow inside you." He doesn't come to fill a hole. He comes to inhabit a new space. When the soul is in ruins, he draws near. When prayer feels dry, he listens even more closely. When the body collapses, the spirit rises. And when the mind grows silent, the heart finally understands. Because God doesn't reveal himself to those who never stop talking, but to those who learn to listen. Silence isn't rejection. It's the language of the eternal. How many times have you sought God in the noise and forgotten that he's in the details, in the whisper of the wind, in the scent of rain, in the gaze of someone who truly listens, in the memory that suddenly brings peace without reason? He's there, not in another dimension, but within your own breath. The problem isn't God's absence, it's your haste to recognize him. His presence requires pause, and emptiness is the invitation to that pause. When God seems silent, the whole world screams for you to give up, but that's exactly when he watches you most closely. He wants to know whether your faith depends on reward, or if it's rooted in true love. True love remains even when it's not returned. True faith endures even without a miracle. And when you keep trusting without seeing results, you prove you've learned to feel God not with your senses, but with your soul. God doesn't need to be felt to be real. He's real because he exists, not because you perceive him. Feeling is the consequence of trusting, not the other way around. When you trust, the feeling comes naturally, gentle, steady, like a breeze through your soul. His presence doesn't arrive with impact. It arrives with permanence. It doesn't come in flashes. It comes in constancy. So when everything feels empty, don't run. Stay. Don't flee from silence. Dwell in it. Because it's there that answers form. It's there that God works, shaping you in silence, teaching you to see the invisible. Emptiness isn't punishment, it's the laboratory of faith. One day, you'll look back and realize that time of darkness wasn't absence. It was construction. It was when God was working in the unseen. While you wept, he was preparing you. While you doubted, he was aligning everything. And when the right time came, the emptiness became testimony. You saw that what looked like a desert was actually an altar. And the silence became presence. Feeling God isn't about effort, it's about surrender. The more you try to control him, the less you feel him. The more you let go, the more he reveals himself. The secret isn't to seek a sign, but to become one. A life filled with God's presence is simple. Live with gratitude, listen attentively, act with love. He manifests himself in those who reflect him. When the heart grows used to noise, silence feels terrifying. But when it learns to trust the silence, the noise loses its power. That's when true peace begins. God's presence is constant, but it's only perceived by those who slow down. He doesn't arrive, he's already here. What changes is your sight. Close your eyes and imagine the emptiness. Now see, the emptiness isn't darkness, it's space. And in that space, God dwells. He's not far away. He's teaching you to see him through the eyes of faith. His presence is discreet but powerful. It doesn't impose, it reveals. And once revealed, it's never lost again. Maybe today everything still feels cold, but even winter has a purpose, to protect the roots until spring arrives. So it is with your soul. God is guarding you from within, preparing the bloom of a new season. And when it comes, you'll understand. The emptiness was only the space between who you were and who God was shaping you to become. God's presence isn't a fleeting feeling. It's a lasting awareness. It's knowing that even when the world collapses, his love still sustains every part. It's waking up and saying, I don't know what will happen today, but I know whom I trust. That trust is the bridge between heaven and earth. It's the sound of the invisible whispering, I am with you. So if everything feels empty, breathe. It's not the end. It's the beginning of a new way of seeing. Emptiness is the womb where God forms new promises. And when you learn to love him even in the silence, you'll discover you were never alone. Because his love is the only sound that echoes even when all else falls quiet. God doesn't move away. He moves deeper. And those who learn to dive with him into the silence discover a peace the world can't understand. That's the true presence, the one that doesn't depend on light but illuminates from within, the one that doesn't need emotion but turns every breath into prayer. And when the soul finally understands this, emptiness stops being a problem. It becomes the sanctuary where the divine dwells. Lord, I'm here. Maybe I don't have beautiful words, maybe I don't even know what to say. What I have is a tired heart, a silence that feels heavy, and a deep longing to feel your presence again. Sometimes it feels like the world spins too fast and I'm stuck, trapped in a time that doesn't move. I try to pray, but even the sound of my own voice feels distant. I try to believe, but fear keeps whispering. And yet, in the middle of all of this, there's something inside me that still calls out to you. Something small but stubborn, a thread of faith that refuses to break even when everything else falls apart. Today, Lord, I don't ask you for answers. I ask for your gaze. I ask you to stay with me in this silence. If I can't hear your voice, then let me feel your presence in my breath. If I can't feel the touch of your hands, let me sense your care in the air that surrounds me. Let your peace find me even when I don't know how to look for it. Teach me, Father, to recognize you not only in miracles, but also in pauses, not only in victories, but in the waiting. Teach me not to run from emptiness, but to dwell in it with you. Help me understand that silence isn't absence, it's an invitation. That emptiness isn't punishment, it's preparation. And that even when I feel nothing, I can still say with conviction, God is here. Lord, when my faith feels small, hold it in your hands. When I get lost in my own doubts, ignite a flame within me that reminds me who you are. When I want to give up, whisper to my heart that it's still worth continuing. When discouragement tries to silence me, speak through your spirit, even in a whisper, that love is still greater than fear. I ask you, God, not only for a sign, but for new sight, that I may stop chasing your gestures and begin to recognize your fingerprints, that I may see you in the simplicity of the day, in the kindness of an outstretched hand, in the song of a bird that sings without knowing why, that I may see you in the face of the one who loves, in the courage of the one who forgives, in the silence of the one who trusts, that I may see you even when the sky is cloudy, because I'll know the sun is still there, even when hidden. God, if necessary, break whatever in me blocks me from feeling you. Tear down the pride that makes me think I can fix everything alone. Silence the voice of reason that tries to control what is divine. And in its place, plant in me a simple heart, one that dares to believe again. A heart that, even when wounded, still opens. Even when tired, still seeks you. Even when empty, still kneels in prayer. I don't want to believe in you only when everything is fine. I want to recognize you when the wind changes and the path turns dark. Because it's there, in the middle of the night, that your light shines brightest. It's there in the deepest silence that your voice is the clearest. So, if I must cross the desert, then walk with me. I don't need to see the road, just to know that your presence is the ground beneath my feet. Lord, renew my inner being. Remove from me the fear of not feeling, the panic of not hearing, the despair of not understanding. Teach me to rest in you, even without answers. Let your spirit be my comfort, your word my refuge, and your will my path. Give me a faith that doesn't depend on emotion, but on certainty. A faith that doesn't need proof, but lives by trust. God, when I look at my emptiness, help me remember that your love has already filled it, long before I even asked. When I feel alone, remind me that loneliness is just the place where your care moves in silence. When it feels like nothing is changing, remind me that your timing is different, and what seems like delay is simply the perfect rhythm of your eternity. Transform, Lord, my silence into prayer. Transform my fear into faith. Transform my discouragement into surrender. And transform my emptiness into dwelling. Let your presence live within me, real and constant, even when everything around me falls apart. Let the sound of your voice reach me when the world goes quiet. And let your love be the answer to every question I don't yet know how to ask. May your Holy Spirit breathe over me now, calming what is restless, healing what is wounded, awakening what has slept. Let my heart beat in rhythm with yours again. Let my soul find rest in your faithfulness. Let my eyes see hope again where there was only gray. And let my body learn to live lightly, knowing that where there is faith, there is life. And where there is life, there is your presence. Lord, thank you for not giving up on me even when I almost give up. Thank you for loving me in my failures, for holding me up when I fall, for seeking me when I hide. Thank you for not measuring me by my emotions, but by your love. Thank you for teaching me that feeling is good, but believing is better. That your presence isn't measured by chills, but by constancy. Today I give you all that I am, even what I don't yet understand. I give you my fear, my doubt, my silence, and my emptiness, because I know that in your hands, even nothing becomes a beginning. You are the God who creates from chaos, who lights up the dark, who turns absence into communion. So make your home in me. Let my heart be your dwelling place. Let my silence become your song. Let my emptiness become your altar. And when the day dawns, let me wake, remembering that I was never alone. Let your presence follow me in the simple, the ordinary, the everyday. Let every step I take be a living reminder that the divine walks with me. And even when the world feels cold, let me feel the warmth of your grace wrapping around me like a mantle. Amen. Have you ever felt like God had forgotten you? Like your prayers hit the ceiling and came back empty? There are moments when the silence feels so deep it seems like heaven has closed. You look up and ask, God, are you still there? It's the kind of question that's born when the soul is tired and faith is bruised. But what if I told you that silence isn't the end? It's the beginning of something greater. That maybe the emptiness you feel is the very place where God is most present, just in a way you haven't yet learned to recognize. The world teaches that presence means noise, emotion, movement, but God doesn't speak through noise. He whispers in the stillness. He reveals himself when everything you know stops making sense. It's in that space between the ending and the new beginning that he draws near. The problem is, we've been trained to feel in order to believe, instead of believing in order to feel. The absence of signs isn't the absence of God. Sometimes it's his way of testing whether your love is real, whether you're seeking his presence or just the rewards that come with it. Maybe that's exactly where you are right now, trying to understand the silence, trying to hold on to faith while everything seems to collapse. And that's why this message exists, because you need to remember something the world constantly tries to make you forget. God has never abandoned you. Even when your heart feels dry, he's quietly watering your faith. Even when everything seems empty, he's still present in every detail you've stopped noticing. So before we go on, I want to ask you to do something. Write in the comments, Lord, speak to me today. That's your way of opening your heart to this message. Write it as an act of faith. And if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, subscribe now, because every word here is a direct conversation between you and God, and you don't want to miss what he's prepared to tell you today. Now take a deep breath and let the silence guide you. Because what you're about to hear might completely change the way you see emptiness. Maybe, by the end of this video, you'll realize that what you once called absence was always his presence, teaching you how to feel without having to see. Have you noticed there's a kind of pain that doesn't scream but weighs heavy? That feeling of being surrounded by people, yet still carrying a void that swallows everything inside. It's as if your heart is begging for something it doesn't know how to name. You try to pray, to distract yourself, to keep busy, but deep down the silence follows you. The hardest part is that sometimes that silence has a face, the face of God. You feel he's distant, that he doesn't answer, that maybe he no longer cares. But is that really true? Or could it be that the emptiness is exactly the space where he's doing his deepest work? Here's the part almost no one talks about. God's presence is not always felt, but it is always real. The problem is that we were taught to associate God with sensations, not with meaning. We expect chills, emotion, some visible sign, when what he wants is something much deeper, a presence that stands firm even when there is no proof. Emptiness is not the opposite of faith. It's the ground where faith takes root. And maybe the reason you feel lost right now is because you're being called to grow. The emptiness didn't come to punish you, it came to prepare you. When everything loses its meaning, it's because something new is being built in silence. God tears down what is superficial to rebuild what is eternal. The problem is that we confuse the absence of noise with the absence of love. But love doesn't need to be loud to be real. It shows up in constancy, in patience, in the simple fact that even wounded, you still seek. Even tired, you still pray. Even without feeling anything, you still believe. That alone is proof that God is there. Because on your own, you would have given up already. Think about it. How many times have you gone through seasons where nothing made sense and only later realized that it was exactly there that God was shaping you? He doesn't disappear. He gets quiet so he can teach you to hear what can only be heard when the noise of the soul finally calms down. Sometimes, his silence is more of an answer than any word. It's his way of saying, I'm still here, but I want you to learn to find me even when you don't feel me. And maybe what hurts right now is not his absence, but the dependency you built on emotions. Because God wants to take you to a level of faith that doesn't depend on feeling, but on trusting. And that transition hurts. It hurts because human beings crave control, and God wants surrender. It hurts because you want certainty, and he invites you to trust even in the dark. But it's in that darkness that his light shines the most. You know what's most beautiful? Even when you think you're praying into the void, God is listening. Even when you think you're alone, he is watching you in silence, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. He doesn't show up when you decide. He shows up when you understand. And that understanding starts now. If you're here, it's not by accident. God brought you to this video to remind you that he never left your side. Maybe what he wants from you now is not more effort, but surrender. Close your eyes for a moment, take a deep breath, and allow yourself to feel what comes after the silence. Because the emptiness that scares you might be exactly the place where God wants to fill you. Emptiness is a feeling that doesn't ask permission to enter. It arrives without warning, like a shadow that slowly spreads until it covers everything. You wake up, but the day feels just like all the others. Prayers feel weak, hope feels worn out, and even the air feels heavier. It's as if something inside you has been switched off. The mind tries to understand, the heart tries to fight back, but the silence is deafening. It's not just the absence of sound, it's the absence of meaning. It's looking up and feeling like heaven isn't answering. It's looking within and not finding anyone there. But the truth is that emptiness is not the end of God's presence. It's the beginning of understanding that faith doesn't depend on feeling. When everything seems distant, that's when he is closest. It's just that in that moment, we chase emotion instead of connection. We want an immediate answer, something physical, visible, tangible. But God doesn't fit into the mold of human hurry. He speaks in a different way. And when the heart is saturated with noise, he allows silence to heal the confusion. There comes a moment when the soul reaches its limit. You pray and feel like nothing changes. The pain doesn't leave, the fear comes back, discouragement takes over. It feels like God himself has abandoned you. But that's the most delicate point, the point where faith is tested and your essence is revealed. Because believing when everything is fine is easy. The hard part is holding on to faith when there's no feeling at all, when the presence of God is not perceived, yet still needs to be chosen. Emptiness, as painful as it may be, is a mirror. It shows how used we are to confusing emotion with spirituality. It exposes how much we still look for a God who fits our expectations, instead of the God who works in the unseen. Emptiness forces you to stop living off of stimuli and start living from essence. It breaks your rhythm, dismantles your control, leaves you vulnerable enough to finally surrender. And it's in that surrender that the true encounter happens. Think of how many times you tried to fill the emptiness with other things. People, distractions, quick promises of relief. All of that seems to work for a while until the silence comes back even deeper. That happens because nothing earthly can occupy the space that belongs to the eternal. Spiritual emptiness is not a defect, it's a calling. It's as if God were saying, as long as you try to fill this space with what is temporary, I will wait until you realize that only what is eternal fits here. There is a hidden beauty in exhaustion. When your strength runs out, the soul finally stops fighting alone. And in that instant, God begins to act. He doesn't appear in the middle of the world's noise, but in the stillness of a heart that's tired of trying to control everything. When you reach your limit, he begins the new beginning. When you stop chasing sensations, he teaches you to seek meaning. Emptiness is the point where the human being becomes real before God. It's the place where the mask of self-sufficiency falls off, and only what is true remains. There, you don't try to impress God with beautiful words. You simply exist. And it's in that honest existence that he reveals himself. Because God is not drawn to performance, but to authenticity. He doesn't want your perfection. He wants your presence. So if your heart feels empty, know that's exactly where he starts to fill. Don't fight the silence. Use it. Listen to what is being said in what seems to have no sound. Feel what is being shown in what seems to have no sign. Emptiness is the meeting point between the end of human control and the beginning of divine leading. And if you can stay there, even without feeling anything, you'll realize you were never alone. God doesn't reveal himself when you demand it. He reveals himself when you surrender. And emptiness is the invitation he uses to make that happen. He's not punishing you, he's preparing you. Because before giving you answers, he wants to teach you how to listen. Before showing you the road, he wants you to learn to walk by faith. This is the landscape of emptiness. And it's in this place that presence becomes lesson, silence becomes language, and the heart finally begins to hear the sound of eternity within itself. There is something mysterious about the silence of God. When everything seems frozen and his presence hides behind the invisible, the soul is pushed into the purest kind of faith, the kind that doesn't need to see in order to keep believing. His absence, or what we call absence, is actually the deepest form of presence. It's the way he trains you to feel without depending on feeling. It's the moment when he trades emotion for conviction, superficiality for roots. God's silence is like the desert. Nothing seems to grow there, but it's exactly the ground where roots go deeper. In the desert, you lose everything that is superficial, everything that distracted you, and you're forced to face what is essential. The city's noise, the voices of doubt, the weight of comparison, all of it fades. It's just you and him, and it's in that raw, stripped-down space that real relationship is born. Because the love of God isn't meant to be felt as a shiver, it's meant to be experienced as certainty. Emptiness and silence are how God matures you. He doesn't want you living off fleeting feelings, but off a solid faith, strong enough to stand when nothing makes sense. He doesn't want you to depend on miracles to keep believing. He wants you to believe so that the miracles keep happening. It's a complete reversal of human logic. Silence is the training of the soul, so it can learn to hear without noise. When you finally understand that God is present, even when you don't feel anything, something inside you changes. You stop being a seeker of experiences and become a carrier of faith. That's when fear starts to lose its grip. Anxiety starts to weaken. Because what holds you up is no longer emotion, it's conviction. And conviction is something time can't steal. Think about how many times in the Bible God stayed silent with the ones he loved. Joseph imprisoned without an explanation. David running for his life for years. Job in total loss. Jesus in the desert. All of them face the same pattern. Silence before revelation. God always does this. He goes quiet before he speaks again. He hides before he shows himself in a new way. And his purpose is never to push you away. It's to take you deeper. The apparent absence of God is the most subtle invitation to a new level of intimacy. It's as if he were saying, now I want you to feel me, not with your eyes, but with your heart. And that shift in perception changes everything. What once felt like despair starts to turn into dependence. What once was only pain starts to become purpose. And what once was emptiness becomes fertile ground for a new faith to be born. God is everywhere, but only those who quiet down enough can notice. He is in the moment the air touches your face, in the detail of a memory, in the small comfort that appears with no logical reason. When you notice this, you understand he was never absent. He only changed the way he was showing himself. There are moments when God removes the noise of his presence to teach you to trust the sound of his so-called absence. That's mature faith. To keep walking when the path feels silent, to keep believing when the heart feels nothing, to keep loving even without understanding. This is absence that is presence, the kind of silence that screams. When you begin to recognize God in what feels empty, everything changes. Pauses gain meaning, waiting stops being torture and becomes part of the process. You start to understand that God's silence is not a no, it's a wait. It's an I am still working. He doesn't need to speak all the time because his faithfulness already speaks for him. Faith is not the end of questioning, it's the beginning of trust. When you learn to see God in what's invisible, pain and stops being the center of the story. And for the first time, you realize the emptiness was never a punishment. It was an invitation to the most real presence of all. When God hides, it's not because he abandoned you. It's because he wants to reveal something that can only be understood in the dark. His presence is too gentle to be perceived among the noise, so he steps back, not to punish you, but to refine you. It's like the moon behind the clouds. You don't see it, but you know it's still there. Steady, constant, shining behind what keeps you from seeing. God's hiding place is a classroom. He goes quiet so your spirit can learn to hear what your heart used to ignore. There's a pattern in every story of faith. Before revelation comes silence. Before sight comes blindness. Before visible presence comes the feeling of abandonment. It's the way God reorganizes the inner life of a person. He turns off the external lights so you can learn to see from the inside. And suddenly, what seemed like loneliness becomes refinement. What seemed like distance becomes closeness. Because God doesn't need to appear to act. He does his deepest work when he seems absent. How many times have you begged for an answer and it never came? How many times did you ask for a sign and nothing happened? That's the moment when God is training you to hear what isn't spoken, to feel what can't be explained. He hides to free you from needing constant confirmation. While you're asking for a visible miracle, He's producing invisible transformation. While you're asking for a sign, He's shaping your heart to become the sign itself. God hides to change the way you see life. He wants you to recognize Him in the small things, in unnoticed details. His presence is not only in moments of spiritual ecstasy, but in the quiet of routine, in the courage that appears from nowhere, in the peace that shows up in the middle of pain. When He goes silent, He's teaching you to perceive the divine without needing the extraordinary. He's leading you into a kind of intimacy that doesn't require a show. The silence of God is the ground where the greatest revelations are born. He allows this apparent distance so you can discover something. He doesn't just want to be worshipped. He wants to be understood. He wants you to recognize Him in the middle of chaos, to perceive Him not only when everything is fine, but when the ground disappears beneath your feet. That's the point where faith stops being just religion and becomes relationship. Think about how He moved in Elijah's story. The prophet expected to find him in the wind, in the earthquake, in the fire, but God came in a gentle whisper, almost imperceptible. That's how He deals with those He loves. He dismantles expectations to reveal the truth. He hides to teach you to seek Him more deeply. He goes quiet to teach you to listen without rushing. Maybe what you're calling absence is the beginning of a new revelation. Maybe the silence that bothers you so much is the way God found to reorganize your perception. He wants you to learn to rest in what you don't understand, to stop trying to decode every why and simply trust the process. Because when He hides, He's preparing something that can't be revealed yet. God's hiding place is not a wall, it's a cocoon. He wraps you in silence, slows you down, transforms you. When the right time comes, the cocoon breaks, and you understand the purpose of every silence. What seemed like abandonment was protection. What seemed like delay was preparation. What seemed like loss was construction. What God is doing right now may not be visible, but it's happening. He hides to align you with something greater. And when the right moment arrives, silence will become testimony. You'll see that He was never far away. He was just calling you to a deeper level of perception. And it's at this point, when a person learns to trust even without seeing, that the relationship with the divine changes shape. You stop looking for signs and start becoming one. You stop begging for proof and start being proof. You stop begging for presence and start living in it. God's hiding place, in the end, is where He reveals what words can't reach. Feeling the presence of God in practice is not about rituals or formulas. It's about inner willingness. It's an exercise of silence, perception, and surrender. God doesn't speak in a shout. He speaks in a whisper. And people who rush through life don't hear whispers. That's why the first step to sensing His presence is to quiet the noise. Not just the noise of the world, but the noise in your mind, the voices saying it won't work out, the thoughts repeating that you're alone. Silence is the doorway to the sacred. When you learn to stop, even for a few minutes, you start noticing signs that used to go unnoticed. God's presence is not far away. It lives in the pauses. Stop for a moment and notice. There is something in you that does not break no matter what happens. A peace that shows up in unlikely moments, a strength that rises in the middle of exhaustion. That's God acting in silence. He doesn't need to be seen to be real. He is the air you breathe, the calm that comes when everything should be falling apart. Sensing His presence is not an emotion, it's a recognition. It's looking at life and understanding that nothing is random. There's an invisible thread of purpose running through everything. The second step is to stop chasing sensation and start seeking meaning. Many people mistake God's touch for chills or tears, but His true presence shows up as direction. God doesn't just want you to feel something, He wants you to understand something. When you pray and instead of emotion you receive clarity, that's presence. When the chaos around you doesn't change, but you change inside it, that's presence. When fear doesn't vanish, but loses control over you, that's presence. God speaks in ways that hurry can't perceive. A verse that keeps repeating, a word that comes from someone you didn't expect. An old memory that returns with a new meaning. He speaks through reality because the spiritual and the everyday are not separate. His presence inhabits the ordinary. It's in the conversation that calms you, the hug that holds you up, the hope that rises again after a hard day. Feeling God is recognizing the extraordinary hidden inside the simple. The third step is learning to notice the subtle signs. God rarely shows up in big spectacles. He prefers the details. A door that closes when you still wanted to go through it. A pause that forces you to wait. A path that seemed wrong, but leads you exactly where you needed to be. These are love codes He sends every day, and the more sensitive you become, the more they appear. The problem is that the logical mind wants to explain everything, while the spirit simply recognizes. Feeling God's presence means leaving the need to understand and moving into a state of trust. His presence is alive. When you choose to stop, listen, and trust, something shifts. Your breathing slows, The weight on your chest lightens. Your vision becomes clearer. God begins to occupy the space that used to belong to anxiety. The soul that once screamed begins to whisper, and in that moment, the invisible becomes almost tangible, not because he just arrived, but because you finally stopped to notice that he had always been there. Learning to feel God is a daily practice. It's waking up and giving thanks before complaining. It's taking a deep breath when everything feels lost. It's answering with patience when your impulse is to explode. It's finding beauty even in what hurts. It's living with the awareness that the divine inhabits every moment. And when that awareness becomes constant, emptiness loses its strength. Silence stops being frightening. Fear stops being in charge. Because the heart learns to recognize that even in the dark, there's a light burning inside. God is not far. He's just waiting to be noticed. And the more you quiet yourself, the more he reveals himself. The practice is not magic. It's simple. Less control, more surrender. Less questioning, more trust. Less noise, more listening. The rest is a consequence. The rest is presence. There are moments when words no longer work and the heart can only whisper. That's when prayer becomes more than a request. It becomes presence. When you pray, you're not trying to convince God to listen to you. You're actually reminding your own soul that he's always been there. Praying when everything feels empty is one of the most powerful acts of faith, because it's in that silent gesture that the invisible starts to move. It's not about repeating phrases. It's about making room. Prayer is not what you say, it's what you surrender. Close your eyes and breathe. Picture yourself in the deepest silence. No sound, no voices, just the calm rhythm of your breathing. In that space, say from your heart, Lord, when everything feels empty, teach my heart to recognize you in the silence. There is no rush in this prayer because God's timing is not ours. Every word spoken sincerely is a seed planted in eternity. When the heart prays, something happens inside the soul. Despair starts to dissolve, fear loses power, the mind slows down. God's presence begins to fill the space that used to be only anxiety. It's a subtle feeling, not a shock, but an awakening. Prayer doesn't bring God closer to you. It brings you closer to him. It is an inner movement, a reorientation of your gaze, a return to the source. Sometimes all you need to say is thank you. Not because everything is fine, but because you believe everything is being transformed. Gratitude is the language of mature faith. It says, even without seeing, I trust. And that trust opens the way for divine presence to flow again. God answers every prayer, but not always in the way we expect. Sometimes the answer is a peace that makes no sense. Other times it's an unexpected strength to keep going. Guided prayer is the moment when you let go of control and simply feel. Let the words flow without forcing them. Say what's inside you. No masks, no rehearsed phrases. If your heart is wounded, say that. If it's tired, say that. If it's empty, simply say, Lord, fill what I can't fill. Prayer doesn't need to be beautiful. It needs to be true. And when it's true, it touches heaven. Now feel this different kind of silence, the kind that no longer frightens you. It doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels full. Because what changes is not the world. It's your perception. When the spirit grows still, God speaks in the language of peace. Each heartbeat becomes a reminder. He is here. He has always been here. And as this prayer happens within you, something realigns. Pain reorganizes itself, fear dissolves, the mind finds rest. Not because life got easier, but because the soul found direction. The emptiness begins to turn into an altar. And where there once was despair, now there's presence. Lord, teach me not to fear silence. Help me rest in your timing, trust in your plans, and recognize you even when I feel nothing. May my heart depend not on signs, but on faith. May my spirit learn to hear you not only in words, but also in pauses. And may I discover more of your love each day, even in the parts of life that still hurt. That is the essence of guided prayer. To turn silence into communion, emptiness into dwelling, and waiting into learning. Prayer is where humanity stops searching outward and begins discovering inward. And in that space of surrender, the divine presence reveals itself, not as a fleeting emotion, but as a lasting certainty. Emptiness no longer feels heavy once you understand what it truly is. It stops being a hole and becomes a space. And that space is what allows God to fill everything again. Reconnection doesn't happen suddenly. It blooms in silence. It's like sunrise. First a distant light, then a gentle warmth, until, without noticing, everything is illuminated. That's how divine presence returns. You don't hear a sound, but you feel that something has changed. Your chest feels lighter, your gaze calmer, your heart steadier. The emptiness that once hurt now becomes fertile ground. Because you discovered it wasn't absence. It was preparation. God didn't abandon you during that season of stillness. He was emptying you so he could fill you again. Every tear, every doubt, every prayer that seemed unanswered was his way of shaping your faith. Now you carry something new, a certainty that needs no proof. This reconnection is quiet but deep. It's realizing that God's presence doesn't depend on circumstances. Even when life is still hard, you know you no longer walk alone. He moves in the small things, in the rhythm of your choices, in the calm that replaces despair. Faith stops being an effort and becomes a breath. You no longer need to look for signs, because you've become one. When God's presence is rediscovered, it doesn't return with spectacle, it returns with direction. You start to find clarity where there was confusion, peace where there was fear, and trust where there was doubt. Reconnection is the rebirth of a weary soul. And the most beautiful part is that it happens within the same landscape that once looked like a desert. What changed wasn't the place, it was your vision. Now, where there once was solitude, there's communion. Where there was emptiness, there's meaning. This is the part of the journey where God shows you He never left. He was simply waiting for the moment you would grow quiet enough to truly hear Him. His presence doesn't return, it's revealed. And when the heart recognizes that, something awakens. You realize that even in the longest pauses, He was still writing. Even when everything seemed still, He was moving behind the scenes of your story. And this is where faith becomes testimony. What once was doubt is now proof. What once was despair is now strength. And what once was searching is now communion. So if this message touched you, quietly declare, "Lord, I'm ready to feel you again." Those simple words are more than a comment. They're a new beginning. Share this light. Someone needs to hear that emptiness is also a path, that silence is also presence, that what looks like absence is often God's deepest way of saying, "I'm still here." Maybe the video ends, but the dialogue with the divine continues. His presence doesn't stop with the last word. It extends into your routine, into every sunrise, into every breath. Today, you no longer seek to feel God. You live with Him. And that changes everything. Because those who've learned to recognize presence in emptiness never fear silence again. The heart that has understood the mystery of absence now carries the peace of knowing that God's love doesn't come and go. It remains, always.